Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters. I'm your host, Liz Lang. Each week on this podcast, we will break down various aspects of mental health. We are so excited you're here and hope you enjoy this week's episode. Hey guys, Liz Lang here with Jeremiah and Selina Woodruff from Core Connection. And this week we are continuing on with the anxious generation. So last week we left off discussing the dangers of giving your young adolescent and child a smartphone. And so this week we are going to continue on with Jonathan Haidt's discussion of how smartphones are problematic and what it has done to teens and why it is so detrimental. This is more of a deep dive into it. And before we do that, Selina has our parenting moment this week.
Okay, so last week, my younger two are in what they call summer track, so track and field, and they had their last track meet. And the way that they did the last track meet, they had it kind of different. So you could only sign up for certain events at certain times. My son couldn't participate in the one that he's used to participating in that he had the whole season. And so he signed up for a different event for the last segment that they were doing. Well, in the meantime, I had family that happened to come into town and they messaged me. It was like, hey, we should get together. And so I was sitting on being torn that I was at this track meet, that his event was going to be much later in the day than we expected. And so he kept saying that he didn't want to do the event that he was scheduled to do. And so as a parent, I kept having all these different scenarios of what was right and what was wrong. If I let him skip out, was I letting him just like give up on something he's worked to do? But technically it really wasn't the event he'd worked all season on. Mm-hmm. So it to me is like, is he going to do good? Is he not? Is he really giving up? Because it wasn't the one that he had been doing all season. And then I had the pressure of the rest of my kids wanting to leave and go hang out with cousins and see them sooner and running out of time. So I really just was sitting at this parenting moment of what is the right choice? What should I do? What's going to teach him? What's not going to teach him? What's the right choice? Because honestly, I wanted to leave. The track meet was going on too long anyways, in my opinion. Yeah. So when he says he wants to leave, I'm like, yeah, let's leave. But then it's like, wait, is that the right choice to make? So are we guessing what I let him do?
You let him leave.
We left. I think he'll be okay. We all learned from it. And then we got some really good family cousin times. So it was worth it. You probably learned some other stuff with them, right?
I love that because it's so relatable. I mean, because as parents, we don't always know what to do. Like, it's so hard to figure out in the moment, and it's just hard to know. And I also love the idea of prioritizing family and going and hanging out with family. I love that idea. So, I mean, would it have been okay if you stayed and he'd missed out on that family time? Yeah, that would have been another good lesson. But honestly, I don't think there was one right or wrong way to do it. And then people are going to have their own opinions. They're and different opinions on it, and that's okay. But me personally, I think you made the right choice.
Thank you for validating me. I think you're right. There wasn't a right or wrong choice. I just start worrying, like, is this going to affect the rest of his life? He's going to give up on everything because I let him leave.
That's another relatable parenting moment because we catastrophize in our head. Have I made this mistake and ruined my childhood for life? And the answer is no. No, kids are much, much more resilient than that. And parents are much better than they give themselves credit for. And as parents, we all choose wrong sometimes.
Yeah, that's the truth. I probably am doing stuff every day that's ruining his childhood. So
if your kid has not said you're a terrible parent, I feel like you're not doing it right. If your kid hasn't told you at least once that you're ruining their life.
That may be true.
Because kids just don't always want what's good for them. So, okay. Yeah, great parenting moment. Okay, so let's jump into the great rewiring. And so we're going to start with what Jonathan Haidt explains about this shift in smartphones that happened in 2012. That is an important component to why they are so problematic. So they allowed third-party apps to be downloaded, and this caused companies to compete to design apps that would hold the attention of customers the longest. Okay. So what's important about that is, and as we talked about last week, the longer they can keep you engaged, the more money they make. And kids and teens are most vulnerable to these apps because they have less willpower and, as Jonathan Haidt states, greater vulnerability to manipulation. So kids, as we discussed last week, they're more dopamine seeking than adults. And so they love things that are engaging, and they love screens, and they love things that are going to engage their attention. And that's not always a bad thing, right? I mean, Legos can have the same effect. We've seen a kid spend hours building a Lego set, and that's honestly a good thing. And that's not necessarily a problem. But with screens, it can really be a problem because with a Lego, it's tangible. You're doing something, you're using your mind and your hands together, and you have this physical satisfaction of seeing something you built. With the screen, you're basically just wasting time. Okay, so there's a big difference, right? But again, it's that dopamine hit that kids get from these screens that is a problem.
Yeah, the difference is that when we're using the screens, there are other things that are going on that are kind of creating the challenge versus engaging in real life play versus watching what's happening. And we're going to get into some of that today and what they're doing on social media or on watching videos or reels or whatever they're engaged in. But real play, at least that's what I tend to call it, versus just screen time, it's just a very different effect on their mental well-being. And so I'd have a hard time comparing screen time to playing with Legos.
Yes.
There's nothing wrong with playing Legos and spending hours building something. In fact, that is healthy and appropriate for them versus endless hours on YouTube Reels, or maybe YouTube doesn't do Reels. That might sound really funny. I don't know, but YouTube Shorts, I think, is what they call it, or Facebook Reels or Instagram or whatever the platform you're using is.
So interesting in the book that he shares that they're on a family trip and his young daughter says out, "Dad, I need you to take this iPad away. I can't put it down."
Yep.
And I was like, oh my goodness, that's just a reality for all of us. I think all of us have probably experienced that moment that he's talking about. It's kind of scary, actually, to me, to realize how much power that has over any of us.
And I want to be clear about something. There is going to come a time in a teenager's life and maybe even a young adult's life where they are going to spend hours in front of a screen researching something for schoolwork. That is a reality of the world we live in, and that's not even a bad thing. But again, they're doing something tangible and educational, and so it's completely different. In fact, I remember one time I told my kids, okay, we're done with screens. It's time to give it a break and do something else. And my oldest tried to say, well, if we have to take a break from screens, then you have to take a break from screens. I'm like, no, that's not how this works. I am doing schoolwork. So yes, I am sitting in front of a computer, but what I'm doing is educational. Daddy is sitting in front of a computer also, but he is working. And so kids do need to understand that difference, and we need to understand that difference. And it kind of goes back to what we said last week of technology is so heavily ingrained in our society that we do need to help kids know how to use it, how to effectively use it, how to be healthy. But there is nothing healthy about spending hours watching YouTube videos. That's not healthy, that's not educational, and that's not good. And so separating those differences is going to be really important for young kids to understand, because they're not going to immediately see the difference.
Well, that goes right with what you were already sharing about how there's companies that are literally spending time and money to figure out how to keep you on those apps for longer, right?
Yep.
And so, yes, using screens and technology and internet, I believe he points out in the book too how internet and social media are two different things.
Yep.
So a lot of times we want to say technology, but the usage of the internet is different than usage of social media because it's designed to keep you on there longer. And it has algorithms and all of those things that they use to affect us.
Well, and in addition to that, if your kid is scrolling all night on their phone, they're not doing research and schoolwork. Like, certainly at times they are. I would argue that a lot of homework is heavily intermixed with other activities when they're on the internet. And of course, we could spend a lot of time discussing how to set boundaries and rules around that for our families and our children. But the reality is the majority of the time teens are spending on the internet is social media. And I think he talks somewhere around kids spending up to 50 hours in a week on social media. Holy cow. Like 50 hours, that's more than a full-time job. And that's a lot of time. And it's a lot of wasted time, and it's a lot of opportunity. And I think that's the biggest key for me is the loss of opportunity, meaning these are times that they should be spending interacting and engaging with peers and friends and family and with the world around them and learning about the world around them. But instead it's just wasted time. And it's so sad to me.
Yeah. And so another important concept that he talks about is when Twitter and other social media platforms shifted to liking and sharing posts. And it quantified social media use, because what this did is this incentivized people to create popular and engaging content, and people started making money, and people started going viral and making money. So we all know Chewbacca Mom, right? Everybody knows who Chewbacca Mom is. And she was like one of the first people to go viral on a Facebook Live. And it's kind of snowballed and evolved from there because she got all this attention, she got this fame, she got this money. Everybody wants that. And that is also really appealing to teens and young adults. So many times people say, oh, what do you want to do when you grow up? I want to be a social media influencer. That in reality takes so much work. And there are people that do it, and there are people that are successful. But I often wonder when I see like these teens that have all these huge followings and these kids that they and their parents create these wildly popular videos. I often wonder what kind of quality of life do they have? And I'm not going to sit here and judge and say these parents are wrong or bad for doing it, because I have no idea. But the reality is it takes a lot of work and a lot of hours and dedication and sometimes years to build it. And it could all be for nothing. So that's another really important component to keep in mind with social media, and why social media can be often appealing to your teens, and why that avenue can be appealing to your teens. And if they really do have this knack for creating good content and it is popular and you can find a way to healthily facilitate that, I have no idea how you would do that. That's a topic for another time. Then okay, that might not be a bad thing, but it is not where you want your child putting their time and their energy. There are other things that are way more important, such as their social life, their education, other extracurricular activities. Social media does not need to be one of your kids' regular extracurricular activities. In fact, it really shouldn't be.
I think it's really interesting because social media is all based on you, not about other people, not about engaging or connecting. It's all about you. What you post is to be liked about you and showing all the good things about you and all of that. So to me, that's really interesting and fascinating, because I'm a big believer in serving other people and how that brings happiness for yourself. And so when we realize that social media is all based around you, that's really taking it inward and just focusing on yourself and not focusing on other people.
And that brings up another really interesting point that he brought in the book. So in 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General released an advisory about the effects of social media. And he definitely listed the dangers of it. But Jonathan Haidt also chose to include this Pew Research that found that teens reported high levels of acceptance as well as a creative outlet on social media and a closer connection with friends. It is so important to be clear that these connections are false. They are not a sense of real connection. Now, I will say social media, texting, and other digital communication it can genuinely enhance an already strong, established friendship. So my favorite example is my really very, very close friend who we were roommates in college, and we've just stayed so close. And social media is critical to us to maintain that close connection. But again, we have a strong foundation. And so our favorite app is Marco Polo, right? So we can send these video conversations to each other, and we do that, and we love doing it, and it fits perfect with our very busy lifestyles. But it still does not replace the in-person connection that we both really want. And we recognize that, okay? And we are also adults, and so we can understand that. Teenagers don't have the capacity to understand this is a false sense of connection. So, yeah, maybe they feel like they are connecting with their friends. And during the pandemic, a lot of people said, "Oh, this is great. They are still able to connect with their friends." It was not the same as the in-person connection that they needed. You have to stress that with your teenagers. Digital connections are not the same thing.
Well, and I think that was proven by a
Yes.
huge, massive increase in mental health diagnoses surrounding isolation and things of that nature that happened during the pandemic.
Uh-huh.
You're absolutely right, Liz. There is nothing that can replace real, live human interactions when it comes to creating human connection. And yes, I think that social media can do a lot of great things. And don't get me wrong, I worry a little that we're just hammering social media and saying it's all bad, because in reality, it's not all bad. And yes, there are some influencers that have made great money and created wonderful lives through the use of social media. And I'm not knocking that in any way, shape, or form. I just think that we should be extra cautious with our children and their ability to use it and have access to it. The last thing that any of these companies is concerned about is the well-being of your children. As they create these platforms and these ways of doing things, they're more interested in how much of your children's time they could have so that they could profit and benefit from it. So as parents, we just want to be paying a lot of attention to that. How much time are we giving to it? How much time are we allowing? And when is the right age to, or the right time to start allowing our children to engage with social media? Because it's going to happen, right? They're going to engage in it. We're all probably involved in it at some level, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as we're using it in healthy and appropriate ways. Because I know we keep harping on kids, but this podcast is about relationships with our teenagers, but adults have these struggles too. Yes. And so paying attention to what's going on in your own life and what you're modeling for your children can be hugely impactful in what they end up doing with social media as well.
And that is one of the big pitfalls of social media, is they're good at it. That's part of the problem. And I will admit that, in my adult life, I have struggled, and I go back and forth. I feel like I have these periods of where I'm like, I am really good with social media because I don't spend a ton of time on it. And then I have these periods where I'm like, oof, I spent too much time doing social media stuff, right? And I feel like adults can all relate to that. But I will say one thing that I feel like I have done. So I don't know. I don't want to say I hacked the algorithm, because this is just what algorithms are meant to do. But I started liking a couple of posts from content that my church has put out. And I will tell you, my feed is full, and I just keep liking them to keep that algorithm going. My Facebook newsfeed is full of really great spiritual and uplifting quotes from my church that I love. And that's me, again, that's me personally, right? So there can be positives, but I try to be so careful in how I'm using my phone and how much time I'm spending. So, I appreciate what Jeremiah said, that there can be great things about social media, but kids have such a hard time differentiating compared to adults. As adults, we have better executive functioning, and we have better comprehension of the effects that screen time have in our bodies, how we feel. Kids struggle with that more. And again, like Jeremiah said, eventually it is going to become a part of their reality. But 11, 12, 10 years old, even 13 years old, it's just too young. They're just not ready for it, in my opinion. And I think you guys would agree with that.
We sure do.
I think it's good to have this knowledge and understand what's happening with social media and understand how it affects your kids, because it helps you to make better choices and be educated in your decisions of what you allow your kids to do and not do, and to help them and to move into that mentor role for them to guide them and help them in the decisions that you make of what you allow them to have and access to when it comes to social media. It's not to be a scare. It's not to just say no social media, but having the knowledge and understanding what is happening and what your child's experiencing helps us to make better choices for them, to help them to know how to use it right.
I agree. Yeah, wholeheartedly. Okay, so I want to list briefly the harms of social media and digital immersion. So, social deprivation, which we've pretty much hit on, kids will get so immersed in it that they miss that in person connection. Sleep deprivation, another one that we've discussed. And I believe I heard this in the book, but kids were waking up in the middle of the night by their phones because they're getting social media notifications and they're waking up to check it. That is so bad for your sleep. That is bad for anyone's sleep. I mean, one boundary that I set a long, long time ago is I do not have social media alerts on my phone. Like if I get any sort of notification or anything from Facebook, it does not go to my phone. And I think everybody should do that because it's constant and it is overwhelming and it's consuming. So when you do introduce your kids to social media, that discussion is important. Another problem is attention fragmentation. And that can also be a problem because, again, they're so used to that fast pace 30-second reel, 30-second reel, 30-second reel. It can make it harder for them to focus on a longer 20-minute lecture in school because they're used to fast-paced video after video after video after video. So it can really fragment their attention.
Well, and that's what I was talking about with the homework, right? And not just homework, but in everyday conversation. If you watch kids, they're not conversing with their friends they're all on their phones. And he does go into that, and we'll talk about it probably in the next episode. But like what it looks like walking down a high school hallway today versus when maybe I was a teenager and in high school, because the attention it bounces here and there. And we've done a great job as parents to teach that, oh, well, I can multitask. And no, we can't multitask. That's not a real thing.
Yeah.
We say we can, but what we're really doing is fragmenting our attention. We're bouncing between multiple things, sometimes at a very, very rapid rate. And some people are better at fragmenting their attention than others. And they call that multitasking, which, again, it's not a thing.
But I do want to say that is sometimes a requirement, especially for moms. Moms, they have to fragment their attention, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they're cooking dinner and a kid comes to talk to them. And that is an important skill to develop, but you need to understand what's really going on in your brain. And you certainly don't need to be doing it. Your teenager does not need to be fragmenting their attention when they're doing their homework. It's not necessary.
Right. Well, and that's the point, right? Because we do need to be able to divide our attention in various places in the world and what we're working on. But what we don't need to do is be in the middle of a conversation and get an Instagram notification and pull it up to look at what that is right in the middle of a conversation with somebody.
Excellent point.
That's the fragmentation that becomes dangerous. Or we don't need to be in the middle of, writing a research paper, but constantly going back to, check our Twitter feed to see how many people have liked our last post, or to see if we've got enough likes on our TikTok video that we published. And so that's where the fragmentation is problematic. We all have attention fragmentation. It's just that where we use that and how we use that, it becomes more important here.
Yep. Agreed. Okay, so the fourth one is addiction. And this one I don't want to spend too much time on because that one, because we've talked about addiction, and if there's genuine addiction going on, you need professional help. And, that is clear. And so it is important to educate yourself and be aware of the signs and symptoms of addiction. But if you do genuinely notice your kid suffering or dealing with that, you've got to get some professional help and you've got to intervene, because it does and can happen. And not every kid who gets on social media is going to get addicted. But even if you do all the right things and you wait until a healthy age, whatever that looks like for your family, like, okay, I think they're ready, it can still happen. So you need to be aware of it, that addiction can happen. But
Plenty of adults are addicted to it as well that didn't
they are.
use social
This is
media until after, it didn't exist when they were teenagers. So
that's a good point.
addiction can happen at any time for any person.
Yes. Okay. So we're going to shift gears and talk about the differences between what's happened with girls on social media and digital immersion and what's happened with boys on social media and digital immersion. And so he breaks down kind of the psychological differences. And with girls, he focuses much more on social media, mainly because they tend to be heavier users. Girls are more engaged. So these are the 4 things that he discusses of why it's problematic for girls. So they are more affected by visual and social comparisons and perfectionism. So that one is another interesting, but another one that I think I want to take some time to discuss is girls' aggression is more relational, right? So oftentimes when we think aggression, we think physical aggression, but with girls, it's more relational aggression. So they will do something like ostracize a friend, right? Oh, that friend was mean to me. They did something I didn't like. I'm going to make sure they're kicked out of our social circle. That's a form of a relational aggression. And that is amplified. It's so easy to amplify that on social media because you can do a ton of damage to someone on social media.
Yeah. And that is one of the major concerns, right? As we look at the kind of the meanness. And it's easy to be open and mean on social media when nobody's right there to fight you back, right?
Yep.
It's just such a different experience. And so we definitely see this more in girls than in boys when it comes to the use of social media and the way it's used to harm others and that creates these rifts in relationships that are, man, they're kind of scary actually, in some of the things that we see out there.
Cyberbullying is a very, very real thing, and it can be detrimental, right? And, it's yet another reason not to let your preteen or young adolescent on social media, because it does expose them to the dangers of cyberbullying, which can affect all aspects of their life. That's a whole separate topic, right? But even high schoolers, even adults, cyberbullying, it's just a fact of life. And so girls more easily share emotions and disorders. That is another good comparison. And I don't want to just blanket say girls are more empathetic than boys, but like social relationships do tend to be more important for girls than for guys, especially as we grow up in age. But, girls' relationships with each other really are social emotional. Boys, it's often they want to go out and play football or, punch each other or whatever, right? Girls want to sit and chat. So it's important to recognize and own that difference. And so that makes girls more susceptible to the emotional vulnerability that can happen on social media.
Well, and girls like the first one talked about, the comparison piece becomes so detrimental, right? This person has more likes than me. This person has more followers. This person seems more pretty. This person's had more boyfriends. This person's had more and more and more than me. And again, we could get back to things we've discussed on this podcast, such as, on social media, we compare our worst to somebody else's best. And that's where the danger comes for, especially for girls, I think. That comparison just destroys that self-confidence and the inner view of oneself. And it's such a difficult spiral to get out of and to overcome.
Yes, agreed. Okay, so the final one, and this is going to be our concluding topic for the week, is girls are more subject to predation and harassment. So they are more vulnerable to online predators than males are. And that's, again, just a reality. And so you have to be so careful with social media in general. I mean, I look back on my early teenage years, being 12 and 13. And I cannot believe that I spent time in like what they were called chat rooms. And it was just this mass room full of just chatting with random people I didn't know. Thankfully, we know and recognize how dangerous that is, because what can happen is you can form these emotional relationships at a young age that you don't understand. And your 12 or 13-year-old could be doing this, and this could be a 40-year-old man in another state, right? And that
It
is
could be in your
so,
own neighborhood, actually. And that's the
it could be.
scary part. And I think we've talked about this as well, because I know the book talks about this earlier on. The predators are going to go where the people are, there where
Yep.
their potential victims will be. And holy cow, social media opened up a wealth of opportunity for these people
Mhm.
to prey on children and to create relationships. And then they become incredibly manipulative and powerful, to the point where they get young individuals to go and meet them places. And anyway, it's such a scary thing. And it goes back to kind of that idea that we became super protective, that book talks about, right? We became super
Mhm.
protective on playground, and we can't let our kids walk to school, and we can't let our kids do this or that, because they might get hurt. We created playgrounds with all kinds of safety features to make sure that they don't break a bone or whatever. And then we stick them online with social media, and we don't manage that, or we don't monitor it in any way. And that's where the real risk is, right? That's where the real danger is at this point in our society.
Well, the book says in the real world, age matters, right? We don't
Yep.
let our kids go certain places or do certain
Mhm.
things in the real world. But in the virtual world, it does not matter.
Yeah.
You
I
don't
used
you don't
go
have
ahead.
to be supervised, and online we're all the same age.
Yep.
Yeah, I used to always say, every guy on the internet is 6'2", 180 pounds, built and extra handsome, and every girl, equals these specific things, and they're all the perfect age and the perfect this and the perfect that, because we can be anything we want on the internet, right? We can lie, we can use AI to generate pictures and images, that we can do whatever we want. And then all of a sudden we find out our 13-year-old daughter is talking to a 40-year-old man, and we're going, what the heck happened here? Because there's no requirement for honesty on the internet. It's kind of sad.
Mm-hmm. And you always think it can't happen to me, or though that's not going to happen to my child. My child knows, I've educated my child. Do you really want to take that risk? And the answer is no, you don't. All right. So that concludes this week's episode of part 2 of The Anxious Generation. Next week, we are going to pick up with what is happening to boys, and we will see you all then. Have a question? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com.